During our first play, collab, and build stream, Niko's hat won the build board. There was only one problem, and we didn't have that pattern. All we could do is use a thrifted hat to figure it out. We used it as a template to create volume and build our leather pattern from. We also added a pair of very recognizable ears and found out whether it would survive becoming something from OneShot. The idea behind play, collab, and build is really simple. We play a game, collaborate with the viewers, and find something worth making. And then, take that winning idea back into our workshop. For the Barrens, the first build was Niko's hat, a part of a reoccurring joke in OneShot, being that the other characters keep mistaking Niko for a cat, and Niko keeps denying it. The donor hat that we found solved a lot of our problems. The basic crown and the brim shape, they were as close as we could get. We also needed to reinforce the brim to hold that proper curve. Since we're not mathematically drafting the hat, we instead used the donor hat as a 3-dimensional pattern block. First, we did a prototype of the ears directly onto the crown until we were happy with the shape. Then, we marked everything up, wrapped it in saran wrap and tape, cut those pieces out into flat shapes, and transferred those shapes onto the leather. From there, we rebuilt the crown, brim, and ears, and put it all together. The ears had a good read from 1 or 2 directions, although we ended up slightly angling them down to give it a more natural look. It's going to have to sit more or less like this. And we can bring these sides down and keep this side up. Let's give you guys a better angle of this. Be somewhere around here. Now, when it's really far apart like that, the ear sits really high and is really open. Way too open here. Let me get this towards the camera. This is way too open. We want this to be more of a closed ear shape. This version had a broad base and a slight forward tilt. That should keep it visible without turning it into a rigid costume ear. And close these up. Now, I need it to be at the top here. That's going to give us that brim shape. This is almost too much. Somewhere around here. Ooh. Come on. Ooh, there we go. Oh, no, it's not going nowhere. Once the placement looked right, I committed those lines to the donor hat, which meant the next step was destroying the only template I had. There we go. There's our bucket. One of the things we need to be mindful of is the seams that we are going to be cutting have the potential to be able to cut along where an ear is so that it is hidden. We can hide it underneath the ear and up, although it will make stitching a bit harder with this, depending on what we want to do, whether we want to stitch up the center of that ear just to give it more integrity. This is kind of my one shot, because once I start cutting, we are going to destroy the pattern we've made. So best to get it right the first time. So as you can see, we've actually cut into the brim of the hat here, and we had this kind of shape going on. So what we determined is that we wanted the front face to be as clean as possible without stitches. To do that, we sectioned off the hat as close to the middle as we could, and then from there we ended up quartering or having those quarters to come down, right? So it gives us a nice clean front face. We've cut this out, and then we drew out a center line here to where the hat itself begins to flatten out and wear this dome shape. So this is going to be a big relief cut. So I'm just going to pull this out, work around it. Now, with the leather being stretchier, and it's not as stiff, we are going to use a part of the hide that has a lot more give, and we're just going to cut in this W shape. We then took this shape and overlaid it on some paper, cut it out, and from here we did some measurements to make sure that you can see originally the line had come out further, and we just wanted to balance the shape out a little bit. So going straight across, right, we can see that we're more or less equal on both sides. We just looked at our points here. We looked from here to here, here to here, and then across. So as long as we can determine that everything is more or less the same, it's going to be a fairly even shape. So then we did some calculations and found that the original diameter was 19 centimeters. The diameter with this shape is going to be 17.8 roughly. You lose a little bit with the thickness of the material. We can get around that by, when we're cutting out our leather, we can come straight down and then create a seam allowance, right? And just extend this out ever so slightly. It's not going to change any other part of the hat other than bringing this and extending that diameter just a little bit. And I'm not worried about it not piecing together. We're going to do some samples, just pin the edges and make sure everything works together so we can adjust that later. With that being said, we have the shape here, we have the ears, and then we also have our brim shape, which I do need to put back together. So we'll do that. I'll get this all put back together and we'll take the leather and start prepping for cutting. For the leather that we're using here, we're going to be using a 4 to 5 ounce brown utility sides. It's an oiled leather. I prefer this for something like a hat. It's going to be really good against the elements. It has a nice, clean, soft finish. The inside, it's a little bit hairy, but nice and soft. You can see it's very malleable, and it has an okay pull. So from here, we have 2 parts of the leather, right? So up here, this is closer to the back. This stuff is a little bit of stretch, right? Along the back itself, it can stretch this way, but trying to stretch it this way has almost no stretch, right? So if you're stretching across, there's a little bit, and you come down this way, there's almost no stretch in this direction. And then you'll get down to the other side, right here, and this is more like the belly, right? Where you can connect, and you can already see how much stretch there is. Even, again, this way, not a lot, but as you move out, you can see there's a lot more stretch. And this here is, you can almost see how I can bunch this up, right? It's very malleable, very easy to work with. So we're going to want to take the brim closer to the back over here, because we want it to be a bit stiffer. We want it to hold its shape a lot better. And then for the top of the hat, we're going to work down mostly in this area here. And this is just going to be where it's the softest and most likely to stretch in more directions than just the one. And that's going to make it a lot easier to work with. There's the pieces. Now we just need to start getting our stitch lines and putting the whole thing together.
The stitch holes are punched while the leather is still flat. This keeps spacing consistent before the crown becomes difficult to handle. We also made sure to stitch all of the holes so that they all started from the same area. That way everything lines up and you don't have a big fuss.
Alright, so we're going to get stitching here. Hopefully this will be an easier angle to see. Now, for this, we're going to need 2 needles. And this guy here, which is a braided wax cord. We are going to start at the bottom and stitch all the way up to the top. All I'm going to do is, it is a cross stitch. I'll link to our tutorial of it, just so if anyone has questions. I'm keeping the X pattern on the inside, and I'm just going to keep the straight across on the outsides. You can see that stitch, and we're going to use, by the power of editing, have this all finished up. Just like that, we have the crown. You'll see, because we only did 4 shapes, we got a little bit of nubbins here on the ends, but our ears are gonna go in between that. Let's see here. We're gonna take our brim and size it, and you can see it sits really high. But as it's leather, we can actually roll this edge down, and it's gonna give us a little bit of that like downward cone shape that we see in Niko's hat, which will be nice. And as we stitch it all together, this edge is going to be what's rolled up over top. So we now need to figure out where our seam allowance needs to be to match the seam allowance, or I guess the stitch line. I keep saying seam allowance, but we'll need to calculate roughly where that stitch line is going to be here, and then where the stitch line is going to be along this, so that we have a similar size. Now we can check our fit and see where we are kind of gonna sit. So I'm sitting here, right here from the main stitch. So that is bang on where we kind of want it to be, which is great. So essentially where this is going to sit, that gap, or like that 1 centimeter, is here. When I put it down over the hat, we were sitting 2 more stitches up, which means that our line here is going to line up with our line here. Uh, 30 times 4 is 120, so there's 124 holes around the hole outside. I've also punched holes all around the brim. Time to get stitching. So for this one, I'm thinking I'm going to do a lazy S stitch. I like how decorative it is on one side, which is going to be our outward facing side, and then the other side is really just like a dot stitch. And usually with a lazy S, you need 4 to 5 times. It's pretty thick, so I'm going to do 6 times. It only needs 1 needle with the thread and uses a little less thread. So we start in between. We have our little tail. I believe we have a tutorial on the lazy S, so we'll link that for anyone who's interested in the stitch itself. We'll also carry on with a little bit of magic in the editing to get this all done. So it's called a lazy S because it kind of zigs and zags out in this pattern. So as long as you keep whatever one on top, you're going to have the same pattern all the way through. And there we go. We have the brim all stitched on. One thing you'll notice is how floppy it is, right? So we definitely need to put a brim on the hat, and then we got to do the ears. All right, so we need to look at where we want to put these ears. So with that being said, we need to put an ear together. Once that's pinned, we'll pin it at the bottom. We're going to also pin it on each side. The whole thing's going to get folded. The pinning is what's going to hold this ear shape for us. We're going to do some pinning down here, or stitching, and maybe some stitching along the line on the bottom. I'm thinking roughly here. Let's see. Marked here and here. Let's see how even we are. One there. There. I have a feeling these are going to be where it pins down against the top of the brim, but I'm not going to get those until I get the back stitch on. And we're going to do that right now. So I went through my own thread, and that's just going to lock it in place. So we're going to go through the center hole. Get over here. Pins up against him. We're just going to go back and forth a couple times. Now we got to figure out what ear shape we want. So this is where I want it. That comes through that comes through. So there we have it. There's the shape of our ear. We know what to do on the other one. So now we just need to make sure that we're setting our holes. Perfect. So I just put two little stitches on either side, and I specifically was aiming for the end of that triangle to hold everything down. We're going to take this guy out, and then we're going to stitch these ears down. All right, ears are on. We're still going to do a little bit more stitching, just because you can see the bottom here. So we're going to pin this side down and this side down. But before we do, we have one major thing left to tackle, and that's going to be this floppy brim that we have.
We ended up not needing to add too much support to the ears. The stitching itself actually held them pretty well. I think if we did it again, we'd use some bias tape and a little bit of wire. That way we could shape the ears however we wanted. The final brim also needed to have some bias tape and wire inside its crease. This way it held the shape a lot better.
It has the same thickness, more or less, as the material we're working with. And then we have some of this, which is essentially already been pre-folded and ironed out. You can just buy this from like Michael's or any kind of craft store.
We are also careful not to get too close to the edge or the wire because we'll break our needle.
Okay. And if you don't have a sewing machine, again, this is something that can be done by hand. You just punch the holes. You can even do it in all leather. I've got a hat that has an all leather brim that had a folded piece. It was just a very thick leather.
This is where it really stopped behaving like a flat leather disc and really started acting like the hat brim we knew it was. Brim wire is not only decorative, but it adds a really important function to the edge, allowing us to control the shape. This ordinary thrift store hat really did become the pattern we needed for Niko's hat built out of leather. Niko's hat came from our first Play Collab build stream. Next Thursday, we're heading into the Glen and filling in a new project board with things that could become our next real-world project. Join us live, suggest an item, and help decide what comes into the workshop next. Would you have chosen the hat, Profit Bot, or maybe something else from the Barrens? Leave your comment below. We'd love to hear it. Maybe we'll add it into our quick builds to do in the future. I've played the game before, so I already have my eye on one extremely round candidate. We'll see you next time. Bye for meow.